The warning trumpets began while Livia's seal was still warm. One breath earlier, she had proved that Roman silver paid the men who carried our routes, recruit names and supply times to Armin Seric. The proof lay on the storehouse table: Vibius's bark dispatch, false burial cloth expenses, private remittances hidden behind estate numbers, and the two cramped letters that marked Armin's channel. Gaius stood on one side of the evidence. Rufus and the fort commander stood on the other. Nobody knew which Roman had authorized the money. Then 3 hard notes sounded from the river tower. Not scouts, not truce, crossing attacked. A 4th note broke in the middle. Whoever held the horn had stopped blowing. Rufus moved first. Iron Ferry, shields to the east gate. The fort changed around his order. Men who had spent the night carrying civilians and prisoners reached for equipment before their minds caught up. The river crossing lay a mile downstream, where the current ran too deep for carts. A broad timber ferry traveled along an iron guide chain stretched between stone piers. It carried grain, reinforcements, wounded men, tax chests, and every heavy wagon that could not use the summer ford. Lose it, and the fort became a pocket with one narrow western road. Hold it, and Rome could still move bodies and food across the river. Livia closed the evidence chest. The payment tablets go south now, copies by separate routes. Gaius caught the lid. If the ferry is under attack, the chest stays behind walls. The fort is already in the compromised route list. Caldus escaped toward the river sheds. A wall with a paid door is not safety. The missing quartermaster had used Gaius's seal before fleeing. Whether Caldus served the unknown Roman payer, Armin, or only himself, he knew where every piece of proof rested. Rufus looked to the fort commander. Send the chest with the reserve, inside shields. If the crossing is held, pass copies south. If it falls, bring it back. That decision placed evidence beside the attack rather than beneath it. It also prevented Gaius from quietly choosing which account survived. He disliked it enough to accept. I stood from the bench and nearly sat again. The hip wound had been closed for a 3rd time before dawn. 1 stitch had torn and 2 had stretched on the return from Vela. My right wrist was splinted from elbow to palm around swollen ligaments. 2 ribs were bruised. Purple shadow still crossed the lower part of my left sight, and the headache behind both eyes had never fully stopped. The scalp cut remained closed. My throat bruise had improved. Exhaustion had not. The surgeon had forbidden eagle sight for 5 days and hard work with shield, spear, or arrow step until the wound settled. Less than 1 day had passed. The surgeon blocked the door. No, the crossing carries wounded. It will carry 1 more if you touch a shield. Cassian's litter waited under the infirmary eaves beyond him. Fever had risen and fallen through the night around the packed wound behind his knee. He could not stand without reopening it. He lifted his practice spear anyway and pointed the butt at my chest. You heard him, Cassian said. Do not touch a shield. I stared at him. Touch a useful order instead. Tiro appeared beside the litter with his stitched arm tied close. Flaccus came behind him, 5 new stitches making a black ladder above his brow. Secundus carried Marcellus's damaged signum and had enough exhaustion in his face for 3 men. None had been assigned to the crossing yet. They had arrived because warning notes gathered everyone who knew how close a wall could come to burning. Rufus solved the argument. Varro marches with me as runner and observer. No sight unless I request it. No shield line. No spear brace. If the surgeon says he rides, he rides. He rides, the surgeon said. A baggage mule became my dignity. Tiro tied my replacement scutum to the saddle where my hand could not pretend to find it. My gladius stayed at my belt. I carried no spear. Recognized legionary did not mean fit legionary. I opened the system panel without using eagle sight. Lucius Varro, level 7, experience 0 of 1,600, strength 10, endurance 12, agility 12, vitality 11, intelligence 13, skill echoes, shield hook practiced, spear check novice, arrow step novice, echo slots 3 of 3. The numbers gave no permission to ignore thread, bone, fever, or rank. Gaius assembled cavalry. Rufus took 42 legionaries, 11 auxiliaries, 6 bowmen, and every engineer or carpenter the fort could spare. Secundus remained with the walls, Marcellus's survivors, and the 12 people in the stone store, 9 hostile captives, Afer and the second Roman detainee, and critically wounded Vibius. Odo and Baran remained separately under treatment. Tiro received a horn and signal flags. Flaccus was told to stay because of his head wound. He answered by joining the engineers, where Rufus could pretend not to notice. Livia rode in the evidence wagon beside Lavinus and 2 sealed copies. Mara, who had brought the rescued children inside, took charge of moving civilian families away from the river road. She was not ordered to the ferry. She went because 32 ferrymen and their families lived around it, and soldiers would count boats before children if nobody corrected them. Cassian caught my ankle as the mule passed his litter. "A ferry is a wall that moves," he said. "Find what makes it move. Find what makes it stop. Do not admire the fighters while somebody cuts the rope behind you. Iron chain. Everything fastened has a weak end." The east gate opened. Rain had stopped, but the river carried 2 days of it, brown, swollen, and loud enough to hide axes. Smoke rose downstream in a thin grey line. Tiro looked at it and then at the silent river tower. "That is not the ferry burning. Wrong side of the channel," Rufus heard. "What is it? Wet reeds, perhaps, a screen." The enemy had begun by making one danger visible and another difficult to hear. We went toward both. The Iron Ferry was not iron. It was oak, pitch, rope, pegs, sweat, and one black guide chain heavy enough to break a horse's leg. People named it for the part they trusted. The west landing lay below a stone customs house. A timber capstan stood beneath a roof, its 4 long bars turned by mules or men. The guide chain crossed the river through iron rings mounted on 2 short piers, one at each bank. Ferrymen used a steering cable and the current itself to angle the broad deck from shore to shore. A second, lighter haul rope helped when wagons made the deck slow. The eastern bank had another capstan, a repair shed, and a village of 12 houses on higher ground. The ferry sat halfway across when we arrived. It carried a wagon, 3 draft oxen, 8 soldiers from the Eastern Watch, 6 civilians, and old Natter, the ferrymaster. One end had swung downstream. The deck struck sideways against the guide chain with each pulse of current. A man hung from the eastern steering cable by both hands. Arrows fell around him from smoke on the east bank. The west capstan roof was burning. Ferrymen and soldiers hauled buckets from a cistern. Others turned the capstan bars, trying to drag the deck toward us. The chain moved a handspan, caught and threw them backward. Someone had jammed the east ring or wrapped the guide chain below water. Arrows changed from the ferry to the bucket line as our shields appeared. Enemy initiative did not wait for us to form. Reed slingers rose on a gravel tongue upstream. White main bows shot from the eastern smoke. 2 narrow fishing boats pushed out below the ferry, with black boar shields laid flat inside them. Rufus took in the field without gold letters. Short wall around the west capstan, bowmen on customs roof, engineers save the chain, cavalry north to the shallow track. Gaius pointed to the east village. The crossing is secured by taking the far bank. Ferry a strike force now. The deck is jammed under arrows. Then clear it. Both orders could not happen first. Soldiers began feeding toward the capstan, while cavalry crowded the river road. Ferrymen tried to carry children uphill through them. A mule screamed beneath the burning roof. Livia jumped from the evidence wagon. Lavinus, chest into the customs cellar. 3 seals visible. You, mark every person who enters. She took the wagon team by the bridles and turned it across the road to make a barrier between cavalry and fleeing families. Mara began sending civilians behind it by household rather than panic. Tiro climbed the customs steps and watched signals, not combat. Flaccus took 3 engineers to the burning roof. I made myself look at machinery. The west chain disappeared through a grooved stone into the river. Each time the capstan turned, the exposed links rose tight, shivered, and went slack. Not an east jam alone. Something below us pulled back in rhythm. "Swimmers at the west ring," I said. Rufus did not ask whether the system had told me. He sent Hanno and 4 auxiliaries under the landing with boat hooks. A clay jar flew from the upstream gravel tongue and broke against the capstan roof. Pitch flared. Another struck the customs stairs. The reed smoke thickened. Our bowmen could see the slingers but not the men feeding them jars. Eagle sight would name one visible body and cost the rest of my damaged vision. I kept it closed. Tiro blew 2 short horn notes. Visible danger. Then he pointed below the landing. A head surfaced between pilings. Hanno hooked a bundle of rope, not a man, and dragged it up. 3 swimmers had looped a hawser around the guide chain and tied it to a sunken cart downstream. The current pulled the cart. Every Roman turn of the capstan tightened the trap. The nearest swimmer came up with a knife and cut Hanno across the forearm. I slid from the mule before my hip agreed. The landing steps were wet. Arrow step stirred at a sling release upstream, offering a lateral move that would place me against the edge. I did not use it. I dropped behind the stone curb as the shot struck the stair. The swimmer climbed between Hanno and the chain. He wore no armor, only dark wool and a knife held backward for cutting rope. Hanno's shield could not fit beneath the landing. 2 auxiliaries grappled with another swimmer in the water. The third vanished under the deck. I drew my gladius and crawled through the narrow space. My splinted wrist made the grip clumsy. The swimmer lunged at Hanno's exposed side. I struck his forearm with the flat and took his shoulder against my bruised ribs. Breath left me. We fell against a piling. He tried to dive. I caught his belt with my left hand. Hanno hooked his ankle. The current dragged all 3 of us until an auxiliary seized my harness. The swimmer kept the knife. He cut my belt, then turned the edge toward Hanno's wrist. I drove my forehead into his cheek and pressed his knife hand against the timber until Hanno tore the weapon free. The man stopped fighting only when 2 ferrymen looped a rope around his elbows and hauled him onto the stones. Experience gained 220, level 7. Experience 220 of 1,600. The auxiliaries dragged the second swimmer onto the stones beside mine. The third escaped beneath the ferry. Hanno bound his forearm with his teeth and one hand. Van and Rusk, he said, after questioning the captives in the river dialect. Reed scouts, told to bind the chain, cut ferry feet, then drown. Ferry feet? Old Natter shouted from the deck. Piers, he means the pier pins. The eastern ring did not rest on stone alone. 2 iron braces were fixed with timber pins above the waterline for repair. Men hidden in the east smoke were chopping them, while missiles kept the ferry crew down. Flaccus and the engineers tore the sunken cart hawser free. The guide chain snapped tight. The ferry lurched upstream so violently that 1 ox went to its knees. The man hanging from the steering cable lost a hand. Natter caught him by the wrist. The old ferryman held a grown man over floodwater with 1 arm while arrows struck his deck. His other hand remained on the steering tiller. Rufus saw what had to happen. We bring the ferry west before the east brace falls. Gaius pointed across the river. And abandon the east village? A horn answered him from the eastern smoke. Roman notes. 3 long calls ordering the ferry forward. Tiro went still on the customs roof. That is our crossing signal. Roman deserters had joined the attack. They knew the horn calls, machinery, and the instant an officer would feel compelled to answer. Gaius ordered the ferry east. Rufus ordered the west capstan turned. For 2 breaths, nobody moved. The ferry hung between banks with civilians on its deck and enemies under it. The guide chain boomed like a struck gate. Gaius's rank carried farther. The Eastern Watch requires relief. Put 20 men aboard and cross. Old Natter shouted from midstream. 20 more and the chain takes us sideways. Gaius could not hear every word over water. He heard refusal in the shape of the ferryman's arms. I had no authority to counter either officer. I had one fact Cassian had put into my head. Find what makes it stop. I went to the capstan. The grooves around its drum showed where the chain had slipped under strain. One bar carried fresh axe cuts. A dead ferryman lay beside it with sawdust on his hands. His widow, Prisca, turned the next bar while blood from an arrow crease ran down her neck. "Can you move the deck east?" I asked. "Not with its tail downstream. We pull west, reset the steering rope, then send it across straight." "How long?" "If the east pin holds, 50 turns. If it breaks, never." The ferry's steering cable ran to the west landing through a smaller wooden windlass. Its line was slack. Someone had cut it close to the water and laid the severed end beneath a coil, so the break remained hidden until needed. A saboteur inside the landing had prepared the seizure. "Rufus," I called. "West first. Steering cable cut here. Ferry cannot answer an east order." Gaius rowed close enough to hear. "Repair it while crossing. The deck swings broadside if we feed chain. Oxen, civilians, and relief force go downstream together. You are a legionary, Varro, not an engineer." Prisca faced him without releasing the capstan bar. "I have crossed this water for 28 years. He listened for half a minute. "You have listened to yourself." The rank around Gaius stiffened. Livia had come from the cellar carrying the manifest, and Lavinus stood behind her with stylus ready. Ferrymen, soldiers, civilians, and 2 officers could all name the choice. Rufus walked between us. "Recommendation, Varro. State it once." This was not command. It was the chance to place a decision where a centurion could own or reject it. "Pull the ferry west. Shields cover the capstan. Engineers splice the steering cable while the deck unloads civilians and oxen. Bowmen suppress the east ring. Then cross a balanced force under working control. If the east brace fails first, lower the west chain in stages so the deck grounds on our bank instead of tearing free." Rufus looked at Prisca. "Yes," she said, "if men turn when I say." He looked at the guide chain, the ferry angle, and the boats below it. Then he decided, "West first, my order. Varro, take 12 men and keep this machinery working. Prisca commands the turns. Flaccus keeps fire off the roof. Hanno clears below." Gaius could overrule him. Instead, the tribune saw Livia's stylus and the ferrymen who would die under the alternative. "Execute Rufus's recovery," he said. "Then my crossing." The words reclaimed ownership without changing the useful choice. Men took the 4 bars. I was given 12 because Rufus trusted neither my body nor my rank with more. 6 were legionaries, 3 were ferrymen. Hanno kept 2 auxiliaries. The 12th was Tiro, who came down from the roof after training a clerk on the horn sequence. His stitched arm remained tied, so he carried signals in his good hand. "You command nothing," he said as he reached me. Rufus said machinery. "Then command the wood politely," Prisca called the rhythm. "Push, step, reset." The capstan fought us through the floor. I could not use the splinted hand on a bar. I watched links, missile releases, and the men trying to sabotage both. The first came from inside our own bucket line. A young porter dropped his jar, pulled a hidden hatchet from beneath his tunic, and struck at the capstan pawl. If he broke the iron catch, the drum would reverse and the bars would sweep men from their feet. Tiro saw the empty bucket before the hatchet. His horn blast made everyone duck. The blade struck the pawl but did not sever it. I drew my gladius and closed. The saboteur moved like a laborer until a weapon entered his hand. Then Roman drill appeared in his feet. He cut at my splinted wrist. I kept the right side back and used the gladius left-handed, badly. He shoved Tiro toward the spinning bar and attacked the catch again. Spear check offered the remembered line of point, butt, rear foot. I held no spear. Echo knowledge could not turn a sword into a brace without changing reach. I kicked a bucket under the saboteur's rear heel instead. He slipped, caught the capstan bar, and swung around it rather than fall. Skilled, prepared. Prisca did not stop the turn. If we stop, deck swings. The ferrymen pushed over their dead companion's blood. The saboteur used the moving bar as cover. One legionary thrust and nearly stabbed Prisca when the wood carried his point wide. "No blades across the circle," I shouted. I went inside it. The bar struck my shoulder and spun me halfway. My hip stitch pulled hot. The saboteur raised the hatchet for the pawl. Tiro threw the horn. Bronze hit his knuckles. I seized his belt with my left hand and drove him against the central drum. He struck backward with his head, split my lip, and twisted toward the river. Hanno left the underpier at the right instant. His boat hook caught the man's ankle. A ferryman named Cotter released his bar for one breath, pinned the hatchet wrist with both hands, then returned before the next push. The saboteur fought until a legionary trapped his neck against the drum with a shield edge. Experience gained 280. Level 7. Experience 500 of 1,600. His name was Erdo. Van called him a reed man. His shoulders carried old Roman lash scars, but his Latin was camp Latin. He had worked the ferry for 11 days under a false name. In his boot we found a bronze key to the east repair shed and a strip of wax listing our horn changes. Deserters had taught him. Someone had supplied the changes after Tiro exposed the old signals. We bound Erdo beside Van and Rusk. None received a blow after defeat. Their information mattered. Their helpless bodies did not offer experience. The ferry moved 10 paces west. Then the eastern brace pin split. The guide chain dropped at that bank. Its middle plunged under the flood and dragged the ferry's upstream edge down. The deck tilted. One ox broke its neck against the wagon tongue. A civilian child slid toward the rail. Old Natter released the tiller, caught her, and lost control of the steering angle. The two black bore boats rose from below the deck. Men in Roman mail stood inside them. Their leader wore an Optio's transverse crest cut short so it would clear a hood. He lifted a hook on a chain, cast it over the ferry rail, and shouted a Roman boarding order. Half the soldiers on the stranded deck obeyed before they saw who gave it. The deserter champion climbed aboard among them. His first weapon was obedience. "Deck guard, face west," he called. "Boarders from the landing, protect the passengers." 4 tired soldiers turned toward us. The deserters' men came over the opposite rail behind them. Old Natter shouted the truth, but the river swallowed half his words. The deserter struck him in the mouth with a shield boss and took the steering tiller. Tiro blew the danger call, 2 short notes. The eastern smoke answered with the same notes, then one long note that Roman crossing crews used for lawful command assumed. Conflicting horns filled the water. Rufus did not send men onto the damaged chain. He ordered our bowmen to shoot the eastern boats and told me to continue bringing the ferry west. Gaius demanded a boarding party. This time Rufus ignored him until the order had been passed. Prisca counted capstan turns. The broken eastern brace meant the chain no longer traveled cleanly. Each westward pull lifted iron from the river, dragged the ferry a pace, then let current steal half of it. Men strained at the bars. The pawl clicked, smoke lowered. Arrows struck the roof and shields around us. On the deck, the deserter used his Roman mail and voice to take control, one confused man at a time. He knew where soldiers looked when orders collided. He sent 2 into the bow, 2 to the wagon, and 1 to secure the ferrymen. His own boarders killed the isolated men. A woman passenger saw it. She struck one boarder with an ox goad and pulled the wounded soldier beneath the wagon. The child Natter had saved crawled after her. Civilians made the first organized resistance on the deck. "Name?" Rufus asked Van. The bound swimmer spat river water. "Drusus Corvin, Roman dog, then boar dog, now his own dog." Erdo corrected him. "Armin's iron hand." Drusus had served as an Optio at this crossing before deserting with military pay. He knew every repair, watch habit, and voice required to move frightened recruits. His level would matter if I could see him. His position mattered now. The ferry came within 30 paces of the west landing. Drusus saw the geometry change. He abandoned the tiller and ordered his boats to pull downstream. Their hooked chains drew the ferry broadside again. "Cut those hooks," I said. Rufus looked at the water. "From where?" A repair skiff rested behind the landing, narrow enough for 2 men and tools. Hanno had already untied it. Cotter, the ferryman who had pinned Erdo's wrist, stepped in with a long-handled chain chisel. His left ear was bleeding from a sling cut. "I steer," he said. "Someone strikes." My splintered wrist could not swing the hammer. Flaccus took it. His brow stitches had begun bleeding, but both hands worked. Hanno boarded with a shield and boat hook. Rufus sent 2 more auxiliaries in a second skiff. I stayed on the landing. A recognized legionary with a damaged body did not become the answer merely because the enemy had a name. Tiro signaled each visible bow release. Arrow step could have helped a single man with room. The ferrymen at the capstan had neither. We moved shields instead. Left ridge, east roof, gravel tongue. The wall turned toward calls, taking arrows on wood while Prisca kept the bars moving. Cotter brought the skiff under the first towing chain. Current spun him. Hanno used the hook around a ferry strake and held them close. Flaccus set the chisel. The hammer rose. Drusus threw a weighted rope from the deck. It wrapped Flaccus's shoulders and pulled him into the ferry side. The hammer fell into the river. A boarder leaned down with a spear. Cotter took the thrust through his upper arm and did not release the tiller. Hanno climbed the towing chain hand over hand, rammed his shield into the boarder, and made him withdraw. The second skiff recovered the hammer. Flaccus, half strangled by rope, put one foot against the hull and struck the chisel 3 times. The hook link broke. The ferry turned. One enemy boat swung beneath it and capsized after its boarders had climbed away. Its boatmen released his weapon and grabbed the stern rail. Our auxiliaries pulled him from the flood and bound him in the second skiff. Van later named him Maro. The remaining boat cut its own chain and withdrew. The west capstan gained the deck 1 slow pace at a time. Drusus killed the ferryman guarding the steering rope. Then he dragged the child Natta had saved into the open and set his gladius across her chest. "Stop the chain," he called. Prisca's count broke. The capstan bars slowed. A man at the pawl looked toward Rufus. Another looked toward Gaius. The ferry began slipping downstream between clicks. Mara pushed through the shield wall beside Livia. She knew the child's name. Elia, bite the thumb, not the blade. Elia bit. Drusus flinched. The woman with the ox goad struck his knee. Old Natta, blood covering his chin, drove the steering tiller into the deserter's back. The hostage dropped flat. "Turn!" Prisca screamed. The capstan moved. Rufus's archers loosed over the ferry rail at the borders. Drusus recovered before the third shaft. He cut Natta across the shoulder and dragged the old man behind the wagon instead of chasing the child. Hostages changed. Resistance did not end. The ferry struck the west landing corner first. Timbers cracked. The chain went slack. A gap of 4 paces remained between deck and stones, filled by brown water moving fast enough to carry a body under the landing. Drusus faced us across it. 6 of his boarders still stood. 3 Eastern Watch soldiers had joined him, whether from fear, deception, or willing desertion. 5 loyal soldiers remained around the passengers. Natta was down. 1 ox lived. The wagon had shifted against the rail. The deck leaned downstream. Gaius ordered a plank bridge thrown. Drusus wanted that. His men placed shields toward the obvious boarding point. I looked beneath the landing. The guide chain rose from the water within reach. Iron links ran to the ferry's upstream corner. A man could cross on the chain with both hands and feet if arrows, current, and pain allowed it. Rufus saw me looking. "No. Send Hanno. He is in the skiff. Then send 2 unwounded men while the plank draws eyes." Rufus chose 2 auxiliaries who had worked river barges. He added me only after I told him Drusus would recognize any formal boarding order and counter it, while the deck soldiers might answer my name from the Vela return. It was not a good reason to cross injured. It was the least bad reason available before the damaged chain pulled free. "You speak," Rufus said. "They climb. If you fall, I do not throw a sentry after you." I tied the gladius high. My splintered right hand could close around a chain link but not bear full weight. The hip wound objected when I sat on the stones. Bruised ribs made the first lowering breath shallow. Tiro crouched beside me. "The surgeon will kill you. He has to wait his turn. Drusus uses ropes. I noticed. No, listen. He pulls men off balance before touching them. Watch his empty hand." Tiro had watched the champion rather than the hostage blade. Cassian would have approved. The plank went out under Roman shields. Drusus's boarders rushed it. I lowered onto the iron chain. Cold entered through my sandals and found every wound. The chain was thicker than my wrist. I hooked my left elbow over a link, placed both feet on the lower curve, and moved sideways. The splinted hand steadied rather than pulled. Water struck my thighs. The ferry rose, dropped, and tried to grind me between iron and oak. The first auxiliary crossed ahead. A sling stone hit his helmet. He stayed. The second followed behind me, close enough to seize my belt if the right hand failed. Arrow step was useless. There was no ground, no lateral landing, and no visible release I could answer while hanging from iron. Shield hook required a shield. Spear check required a spear, footing, and a charge to meet. 3 echoes filled my mind. None could cross 4 paces for me. Tiro called missiles from the landing. High left, east roof, gravel. Roman shields on the plank rose toward each call. Our crossing remained low beneath the rail until the ferry dropped. Then the first auxiliary rolled onto the deck behind a dead ox. I followed too slowly. My hip seized while one leg remained over the chain. A boarder saw me. He thrust down with a spear. The auxiliary ahead caught the point on a small shield. The shaft slid and struck my splint. My fingers opened. The man behind seized my harness. For one breath I hung from his arm with the current taking my legs. The woman passenger with the ox goad stabbed the boarder's face. He recoiled. I threw my chest over the rail, bruised ribs crushing against wood, and let the auxiliaries drag me aboard. "Passengers under wagon," I shouted. "West Watch soldiers, hold where you are. Rufus is on the bank." 2 loyal soldiers recognized the centurion's name. The third demanded a signal. Tiro answered from shore with Rufus's assembly call, then spoke the soldier's name because he had counted the deck before we crossed. The man turned his shield away from us and faced Drusus. That decision gave the auxiliaries room. We formed a crooked line behind the dead ox. I took the fallen boarder's spear in my left hand. Spear check stirred. The deck offered wet planks, a rolling angle, and civilians behind me. I did not brace. I used ordinary short thrusts beside the auxiliary shields. Drusus did not rush us. He ordered one of the eastern soldiers to cut the west guide chain at its ferry shackle. He sent 2 boarders toward the passengers. Then he stepped onto the wagon tongue, above the line, and cast his hooked rope. Tiro's warning returned. "Watch the empty hand." The hook went past my spear and caught the harness at my right shoulder. Drusus pulled before I could cut it. The splinted wrist struck the ox yoke. I fell across the animal's neck. He did not drag me toward himself. He dragged me sideways into the auxiliary's legs. Our small line opened. Boarders entered. One auxiliary took a sword in the thigh. The other held 2 men from the passengers. I cut the rope with my gladius and tried to rise. Drusus jumped from the wagon tongue. Eagle sight opened for less than a heartbeat. Drusus Corvin, level 10, strength 16, endurance 15, agility 14, vitality 14, intelligence 13, mastered skills, lock break, line voice, chain cast, injury, damaged left knee, old, bitten right thumb, fresh, pain burst behind my eyes, purple swallowed the center of his body. I closed sight and nearly vomited over the ox. Level and skills did not tell me whether the 3 eastern soldiers were loyal to him, terrified, or deceived. They did not reveal the knife in his boot or his next movement. I knew the knee because a child and a woman had already found it. Drusus kicked the spear from my left hand. He was stronger than I was and uninjured where it mattered. He seized my harness and wrist, turned his hip across mine, and threw me onto the deck. The movement was lock break. It did not break a lock made of iron. It broke the position of a man trying to hold or bind. Drusus made contact, found leverage against my gripping arm, placed his hips where mine could not resist, and turned the whole restraint into a fall. The old knee shortened his step, but did not ruin the technique. He demonstrated it again when the first auxiliary grabbed him from behind. Drusus trapped the man's fingers, lowered under the hold, turned toward the weak thumb, and sent him over the wagon tongue. Against one grappler on sound planks, the counter was clean. It failed when the ox-goad woman seized his cloak from the other side at the same time. 2 different pulls gave him no single leverage line. He cut the cloak free instead. The technique did not answer multiple grapplers. The blade did. I rose with the gladius. Drusus had no shield now. I did not grapple him. I kept the point between us and told the loyal soldiers, "Close around the passengers. Do not chase his voice." Drusus shouted in the exact tone of a Roman optio, "Second file, arrest Varro. Tribune's command." One Eastern soldier moved toward me. Another struck him with a shield and shouted that Gaius stood on the bank. The third ran for the chain shackle. Command friction became steel. Men who had served together attacked one another because a familiar voice offered different law. Tiro changed the answer. He did not repeat Rufus's calls. He sounded 1 long note and 3 short, a pattern we had never used. "New signal," he shouted. "Only the West Bank knows it. Face any man who repeats the old call." Drusus could imitate what he knew, not what Tiro invented in front of witnesses. The confused Eastern soldier dropped his weapon. The willing deserter at the shackle kept cutting. Difference revealed itself through action, not sight. I went toward that axe. Drusus blocked me. He cast the shortened rope at my ankles. I saw the hand, but had no room for arrow step between dead ox and rail. I stepped over. The injured hip failed. The hook caught my rear sandal and pulled both feet away. Drusus came down to pin my sword arm. His right thumb was bleeding. His left knee did not bend fully. I tried to seize the wounded hand. He used lock break from above, rolled my wrist toward its weak direction, and forced the gladius out. The splint saved the joint from turning farther. It also prevented me from following his grip. He drew the boot knife Eagle Sight had not shown. Old Natter struck him with the steering tiller. The ferryman had crawled from behind the wagon with one shoulder cut open. The blow hit Drusus's old knee. It folded. Natter fell beside him. Drusus stabbed at Natter. Elia, the child, pulled the old man's cloak. The knife missed his throat and entered the deck between cloth and skin. I trapped Drusus's knife wrist with my left forearm and body weight. This was not a clean restraint. My footing was 1 knee. My right hand could not close, and the ferry rolled. He began the lock break turn. I knew only what I had watched: contact, leverage, body position, weak thumb. Knowing did not give me the skill. The ox-goad woman knelt on his bleeding hand. The first auxiliary seized his belt. Natter, half conscious, wrapped both arms around the bad knee. 3 holds from different directions defeated the single counter. Drusus released the knife to punch. I drove my forehead against his jaw. He remained stronger. He lifted all of us for 1 terrible instant. Then the West Plank party reached the deck. Hanno came first with his boat hook. He pinned Drusus's free arm. Flaccus followed, brow pouring blood, and put a shield over the deserter's chest. 2 legionaries took the legs. Drusus could not lock break 6 bodies. He could not reach his blade. He could not find footing beneath the weight. "Yield," I said. He spat blood into my face and tried once more to throw Hanno. Rufus boarded last. His vine staff struck the deck beside Drusus's ear. "Yield under my custody, or keep fighting 6 men until one makes an error." Drusus looked at the river, the armed circle, and the child he had used. Calculation outlived pride. "I yield to a centurion," he said. We bound elbows, wrists, knees, and ankles separately because lockbreak needed only 1 careless hold to begin. Hanno kept a hook through the rope while 2 men watched. His mouth was packed with cloth only after he tried to issue another order. Experience gained 650. Level 7, experience 1,150 of 1,600. Skill echo available, lock break. All 3 slots were full. Capturing the ferry was not the same as holding the crossing. Drusus's defeat broke the 9 men who had stood with him. Of his 6 boarders, 2 surrendered to Rufus, 1 leaped into the flood and drowned before a body could be recovered, and 3 retreated in the remaining boat. Of the 3 Eastern Watch soldiers, the willing deserter at the chain shackle died fighting Hanno. The confused man who had lowered his weapon surrendered for Roman inquiry, and the soldier who had struck him rejoined the loyal deck guard under Rufus's eye. The loyal soldiers gathered passengers beneath shields. Old Natter still breathed. Cotter still held his skiff tiller with a spear hole through his arm. The ferry remained attached by a damaged shackle and one working west capstan. Rufus brought the deck against the landing. Civilians crossed first. Elia would not release Natter's cloak until Mara took her. The ox-goad woman gave her name as Junior, a mule dealer traveling with her sister's child. She had no military title. 4 armed men carried wounds because she had chosen where to place a stick. The moment my feet reached stone, the surgeon's assistant cut open the hip binding. The third closure had stretched again. Blood reached my sandal. My ribs hurt with every breath. The splint had cracked near the thumb. Purple spots joined the old shadow after one forbidden blink of sight. Rufus ordered me into the customs cellar for treatment and placed Drusus in the room across the passage. The evidence chest sat between them under Livia's seal, Gaius's seal, and the fort commander's seal. A hostile deserter champion, proof of Roman payments, and my wounded body rested within 6 paces. 20 guards would not have felt excessive. Outside, axes struck the damaged ferry brace, bowstrings snapped, men shouted for chain wedges. The battle had not paused, I had. The lock break offer waited behind my closed eyes. I held shield hook at practiced. It belonged to the scutum, the Roman line, and years I expected to spend behind both. I held arrow step at novice. It had already saved me from visible shafts and thrown me toward hidden ones. Its limits were severe, but missile fire had become Armin's favorite answer to formation. Spear check remained novice. I had captured it at the lower bridge, drilled it on a litter, used it to stop charges, failed with it in mud, dropped it when spilled grain ruined footing, and been forbidden to load the hip with it. The motion fit Roman equipment and line survival. It was useful. Lockbreak was useful differently. Ropes, nets, capture orders, and men like Drusus had followed me since Armin learned my name. A counter to one restraint could keep me from becoming the hostage who broke everyone else's formation, yet it required contact, leverage, and compatible body position. Drusus had failed when multiple people held him. He had used a blade when the hold was wrong. Bad footing, exhaustion, surprise, and superior strength could erase the path. Capturing it would not make chains fall open. I could not dismiss an echo while men struck the door or while fear chose for me. The system required calm focus. That was not safety. It was a mind steady enough to understand what memory it ordered away. I told the surgeon's assistant to finish tying the hip. I drank water. I listened until my breathing matched the measured clicks of the capstan outside. Then I opened the echo panel. 3 slots, shield hook, spear check, arrow step. Dismissal warning. A held echo may be released only during calm focus. Dismissal causes memory nausea and temporary clumsiness within the movement family. Released knowledge cannot be recalled without a new capture opportunity. Cassian had taught me the beginning of spear check after the system gave me the ending. His voice was not the echo. The drills were not the echo. My ordinary memory would remain, but the golden guidance that joined butt, point, rear foot, shoulder, hip, and return would be gone. That distinction did not make the loss small. I chose spear check. Dismiss spear check. Novice? Yes, I said. The remembered brace came apart. Nausea struck before pain. My stomach rose. The cellar tilted. My left shoulder tried to settle behind a spear that was not there, while my feet disagreed about which one belonged behind. I put a hand on the evidence chest and missed its edge. The splint struck iron. I vomited water beside the wall. The surgeon's assistant caught my harness. What did you do? Made room. In your stomach? Across the passage, Drusus watched through swollen eyes. He understood when I looked at him. You threw away a Roman check for a prisoner's trick, he said. You lost the ferry to civilians and men you taught to obey. I will judge your trick myself. The system offer remained. Capture lockbreak. I accepted. Skill echo acquired. Lockbreak. Novice. Echo slots 3 of 3. Knowledge entered as pressure in fingers, elbow, shoulder, hip, and the small changes that turned a restraint toward its weakest joint. My body tried to perform the first escape against the surgeon's supporting arm. The new echo met the clumsiness left by spear check. I shifted the wrong foot, twisted my wounded hip, and fell against him instead of free. Pain opened the binding again. Drusus laughed through the gag a guard had replaced. The surgeon's assistant lowered me to the floor and checked the stitch with a face that promised murder after medicine. "Novice," I said. "Idiot," he answered. Both were accurate. A legionary ran into the cellar carrying a spear. "Rufus needs Varro at the chain. The enemy has launched reed barges from upstream." I reached for the shaft by habit. My hands found the old spear check spacing, then lost it. The point struck the ceiling. The butt hit the evidence chest and broke Livia's wax tablet from its cord. She caught it before it fell into my vomit. Livia put the tablet back under her seal. "No spear. You will explain with your mouth." Outside, fire moved toward us on the river. 3 barges came around the upstream bend without crews. Reeds hid their decks and rose in wet bundles around clay jars. A steering sweep on each craft had been lashed to angle them toward the west landing. The current did the rest. Smoke leaked from beneath damp hides. The enemy wanted them close before the fire breathed. White main archers moved along the eastern bank behind the barges. Reed slingers kept our customs roof down. Black boar shields gathered among the east village houses. Drusus's seizure had failed, so the Confederation changed tasks without waiting for permission from a captured leader. Rufus ordered bowmen to break the jars. Livia stopped the first volley. If those hold pitch, arrows open them upriver and spread burning liquid across the whole landing. Flaccus wiped blood from one eye. If they hold men, waiting lets them land. Cotter, his wounded arm tied against his body, smelled the smoke. Green willow and wool, fire banked low. They will uncover it at the last bend or use a trailing cord. Tiro pointed at the water behind the 3rd barge. A thin line skipped on the surface toward the east bank. A man in reeds held the ignition cords. Our bowman shifted. He released them before they found range. The wet hides fell inward. Air reached charcoal pans. Flame climbed through reeds, found the clay jars, and became orange walls traveling on brown water. The west capstan roof could burn. The ferry could burn. The customs house had a tile roof, but its doors, shutters, and the evidence cellar beneath were timber. Civilians still crowded the upper road. Drusus and other captives remained below. We could not simply abandon the landing and call the chain denied. Rufus looked at me. Machinery. My stomach rolled again from the echo dismissal. A spear leaned against the wall within reach. I kept my hand off it. "Slack the guide chain," I said. "Use the ferry as a gate. Put it nose upstream between barges and landing." Priska heard and swore. "With the east brace down, we may never raise the chain again. Can the deck survive one strike? One, if the jars do not break under it, not 3. Then turn one," she understood. The ferry was broad enough to block the first barge. Its surviving steering rope could angle the burning craft toward the gravel tongue, where no houses stood. The other 2 required boats, hooks, or broken hulls. Rufus approved before Gaius could propose cavalry against water. Priska took command of the west windlass. Ferrymen lowered chain by measured links. The ferry drifted from the landing with 6 shielded soldiers aboard, and Natta's blood still on the deck. The first barge hit its upstream corner. Fire rolled over the rail. Soldiers beat it with wet hides. Priska hauled the steering rope. The ferry turned the burning bow toward the gravel tongue. Current did what muscle could not. The barge slid away, trailing flame. The second came straight at the repair skiffs. Hanno and Cotter boarded one. Flaccus took the other with 2 engineers. I stepped toward them. Rufus put his vine staff across my chest. "You chose. They execute. The hooks may need. Men with 2 working hands? Yes. Command required remaining where the field could be seen while other people took the danger. Gaius did it too easily. I hated it at once. Tiro called missile releases for the skiffs. Hanno could not arrow step on water, so Cotter changed angle at each call. White main shafts struck river behind them. One entered the hull. An engineer plugged it with his sandal and kept rowing barefoot. Hanno caught the second barge with his boat hook. Fire ran along the shaft toward his hand. He released before it burned him, changed to the iron chain chisel, and punched through a side plank. River entered the barge. It did not sink. Bundled reeds gave it buoyancy. Flaccus rammed the second skiff into its stern and turned his oar across the steering sweep. His brow wound opened fully. Blood made one side of his face red. He and both engineers pulled while Cotter pushed with the wounded arm he had been told not to use. The burning craft turned one handspan, then another. A white Main archer stepped onto a roof across the river and began shooting only at rowers. He used the same short lateral movement Sen had shown. Release, shift, cover. Arrow step. Our bowman missed twice. Eagle Sight could name him if I found him through smoke. The pain from Drusus had already spread purple across the center of my left view. Rufus had not requested sight. I watched ordinary timing. The archer shifted after his own release and after ours. He used a chimney as cover, appearing on alternating sides. Tiro saw the pattern too. He counts our bow captain, Tiro said. Break the count. Tiro gave the release call early. Our bowman held. The enemy archer stepped from cover, expecting shafts already in flight. 3 Roman bows loosed together. He used arrow step toward the far edge of the roof, but a missing tile changed his landing. His foot broke through. He fell to one knee. Roman arrows struck the wall around him. None defeated him. He crawled behind the roof peak. The second barge missed the landing by the length of a mule and struck the stone pier. Clay jars shattered. Pitch washed over the upstream face, but the current carried most fire away. Ferrymen smothered the rest with wet grain from the damaged wagon. Livia marked the sacrificed sacks without leaving the evidence door. The third barge carried the trick. Men rose from inside it when our skiffs committed to the second. 6 archers and 4 shieldmen threw off burning reed covers that had protected a central pit. The flames around them were small and controlled. They shot downstream into Hanno's back, then steered for the now open west landing. Their leader was the rooftop archer. The man behind the roof peak had been a cloak on a stick. Eagle Sight would have found the visible decoys level and told me nothing about the hidden barge. Castor, Van called him, White Mane. He stood in the stern with pale horsehair bound around his bow. Rufus turned the short wall from river to landing. We had 17 shields there. Others fought fire, guarded captives, repaired the ferry, or held the civilian road. Gaius's cavalry could not charge through capstan bars and wet stone. He dismounted and placed them on foot at the customs stairs. Castor's barge struck. The hidden fighters did not leap ashore. They hooked the landing, held the barge 1 pace away, and shot from below our shield rims. The first volley took 2 legionaries in the calves. Men lowered shields. The second volley rose toward faces. Rufus's short wall staggered between heights. Castor had studied Roman protection. Low, high, low. His archers changed together while slingers on the gravel tongue struck from the side. Shieldmen remained crouched on the barge, waiting for our line to lose shape. Tiro listened to bowstrings. Low, shields dropped. Sling left, the outer file turned. High, wood rose. He could not call every missile. 1 arrow entered a man's throat. A sling stone broke another's jaw. Signals reduced damage. They did not make a wall complete. I stood behind the capstan with no spear and my replacement scutum tied loosely to my left arm. The surgeon had forbidden hard shield work. The battle had not asked him. The splinted right wrist stayed against my chest. Shield hook at practiced waited in the left shoulder and feet, but hooking from the wrong side reversed every familiar angle. Castor loosed at the capstan pawl, not the men. An iron-tipped arrow struck the wooden block beneath it. A second split the grain. If the support broke, the ferry and guide chain would run out uncontrolled. Cover the pawl. Prisca put her body there before a shield arrived. I took her place. The scotum covered the block and most of me. The first arrow punched through the outer board, but stopped in layered wood. The impact jarred my left shoulder rather than the splinted wrist. The second struck low. I adjusted. Castor watched the adjustment. His third arrow went high into the capstan rope, cutting fibers. He walks the target, I said. Move the mechanism, not only shields. Flaccus found a spare iron plate from the repair shed. 2 ferrymen crawled it beneath the scutum and laid it over the pawl support. Livia sent account clerks with water skins to wet the capstan rope. They obeyed because she named tasks, not courage. The barge shieldmen boarded. They came over the low side beneath our lowered shields, axes hooking ankles. Bren, a black boar hookman with a scar across his scalp, caught the first legionary behind the knee and pulled him off the landing. Hanno's skiff reached the man before Current did. That rescue took Hanno away from the borders. Shield wall, short sword, feet under me. Bren hooked my scutum rim. Shield hook recognized the contest even from the left arm. I did not pull against his strength. I stepped toward the hook, shortened his chain, turned the rim down, and trapped the iron head against the landing edge. Practiced rank made the path economical. The injured hip made the step shallow. He released the chain and boarded inside my shield. Lockbreak offered contact paths when he seized my harness. His right hand gripped high. His shoulder pressed mine. His hip stood outside my stance. The echo suggested trapping the thumb, turning under the elbow, and taking the space beside him. I tried. Memory knew the path. My body had never drilled it. The splinted right hand could not trap. I used the left, which left my sword side closed. Bren was stronger and drove his forehead into mine. Purple light burst without eagle sight. He threw me against the capstan. Tiro struck Bren behind the ear with the horn. Priska caught his chain around a capstan bar. The moving wood yanked him sideways. I drove a knee into his damaged balance, and a legionary pinned him beneath a shield. He kept fighting until Rufus's vine staff knocked the axe from his hand and 3 men bound him. Castor saw his hookman fall and ordered the whole barge forward. Shieldmen surged from below. Archers shot between their shoulders. The landing became too crowded for arrow step. Any lateral move would collide with Priska, the capstan bars, or a wounded soldier. I stayed. Gaius entered the line on foot. His clean officer's mantle was gone. He used a cavalry shield and short spear, directing men toward the customs wall, where stone protected one side. Rufus kept the center around the machinery. Their commands differed but no longer collided. One defended the crossing's body. One defended the evidence and road. Livia moved Drusus. The customs cellar faced the boarding lane. If enemy fighters broke the stairs, they would reach Drusus and the chest together. She had Lavinus carry 1 sealed copy uphill with Mara and Elia. Guards moved Van, Rusk, Erdo, Maro, and the 2 surrendered boarders through an inner passage. Drusus required 4 men and a grain door litter because nobody trusted him on his feet. He tried lock break when 1 guard held only his wrist. Livia saw the turn begin and ordered all 4 to lower him at once. He gained nothing from the floor. You learned quickly, Drusus said. I audit losses, she answered. You announce one before it occurs. The prisoners reached the uphill store. The main evidence chest remained in the cellar because moving it under arrows risked both seals and contents. Livia divided vulnerability instead of pretending she could remove it. Castor boarded last. He wore no heavy armor. Arrow step carried him sideways around a Roman thrust, but the landing was wet with pitch and blood. His outside foot tested before each movement. He chose the same 3 sound stones. I saw them without gold. Tiro, 3rd stone. He followed my eyes. The nearest sound landing lay beside the capstan drain. Tiro pulled its wooden grate with his good hand. Muddy water spread over the stone. Castor loosed at him. Tiro dropped the grate and turned his stitched arm away. The arrow cut his tunic without entering flesh. Our bow captain fired. Castor stepped toward the usual stone. His foot found water. Arrow step shortened into a stumble. He recovered before falling and shot from 1 knee. The shaft struck my scutum near the old arrow. Wood split. My left arm went numb. I did not rush. He wanted a straight attacker he could move around. Junior came from the civilian road with another ox goad. Rufus shouted for her to stay back. She ignored him and pushed the goad through the capstan wheel so its hook emerged behind Castor's ankle. She did not try to pull him down. She denied one landing. Flaccus placed a shield at the second. I held the split scutum at the third. Castor had room behind him only on the barge. Hanno had cut its hook. Current opened a gap. The archer chose me. He shifted inside the scutum, too close for his bow, and drew a knife. I released the shield before its weight trapped the numb arm. He caught my tunic with his free hand. Lock break saw contact, leverage, compatible position. One hand held cloth high. His elbow floated away from his ribs. His weight moved forward. My left hand worked. I trapped the thumb, turned toward the opening, and stepped beside him rather than backward. Novice guidance was late. His knife grazed my upper arm before the angle changed. The movement did not defeat him. It stopped the cloth grip from controlling me. I drove him toward the drain. Tiro hooked his ankle with the great handle. Flaccus struck the knife wrist. Junior put the ox goad across his throat without cutting. Castor fell on wet stone, still punching, until Hanno returned and locked both arms beneath a shield. Experience gained 450. Level 8 reached. Experience 0 of 2,100. 2 free stat points available. The first threshold closed exactly. Van beneath the landing gave 220. Erdo at the capstan gave 280. Drusus on the ferry gave 650. Castor at the pawl gave 450. 220 plus 280 plus 650 plus 450 equaled 1,600. From 0, that met the level 7 threshold with no overflow. The system offered growth while enemy shields still held half the landing. I chose 1 point of strength and 1 of vitality. Strength 11, Endurance 12, Agility 12, Vitality 12, Intelligence 13. The change tightened muscle around wounds instead of closing them. My ribs cramped. The hip bled beneath its new wrap. The splinted wrist remained damaged. The knife graze on my upper arm stayed open. Purple shadow stayed in my left sight. Strength 11 did not make Drusus weaker or my lock break practiced. Vitality 12 gave damaged flesh more reserve to remain damaged. Castor's defeat broke the timing of the barge attack. Rufus drove the other 5 archers and 3 shieldmen back aboard with short wall. Gaius held the customs stair. Hanno cut the barge free, and all 8 retreated downstream on it. The west landing remained Roman. The east bank did not. A black boar standard rose above the ferry village. Men dragged captives from the houses and placed them along the damaged guide chain brace. Behind them, axes began cutting the final timber pin. Prisca looked across at her husband, 2 sons, and 6 neighbors bound beside the iron ring. "If that pin falls," she said, "we keep one shore and lose the crossing." Rufus counted before he crossed. 34 soldiers remained able to fight on the west landing. 12 had wounds that permitted only shield support or missiles. 6 ferrymen could work machinery. The ferry had a cracked upstream rail, scorched deck, damaged shackle, and steering cable spliced with raw rope. The east guide brace hung by 1 timber pin and an iron wedge. At least 40 enemies showed among the houses. More hid behind the ridge. 9 visible civilians knelt near the brace. Prisca named 11 people missing. Gaius wanted every fit man aboard. Rufus refused. A full ferry leaves the west capstan, evidence, prisoners, and civilian road to 1 fire team. A half force loses east. Then we cross twice if the chain holds. It will not. Then the first force requires a west bank to pull it home. That ended the argument because the machinery made rank answer weight. Rufus chose 16 legionaries, 6 auxiliaries, 4 bowmen, and 8 ferrymen for the first crossing. Gaius took 8 cavalrymen on foot. Rufus remained the surviving centurion in direct command. I went because he said the capstan decision had made my observations useful and because I could identify Drusus's deserter methods. Tiro stayed at the West Horn despite protesting. His stitched arm had bled through the cloth after pulling the drain grate. From the customs roof he could see both banks and signal reserves. Flaccus remained with him, too dizzy from blood loss to cross without becoming cargo. Livia kept the main evidence chest below stone, sent the first sealed copy uphill under Mara's count, and prepared the second for the southern road if we restored passage. Junia refused evacuation until Elia and Nata were both under treatment. Then she joined Prisca at the West Windlass. "You are a mule dealer," I said. "Mules dislike water," she replied. "That makes us students of ferries." Rufus's field tablet showed 9 hostile captives before we pushed off. The 2 swimmers, Van and Rusk, the saboteur Erdo, Maro, the capsized boatman, Drusus, his 2 surrendered boarders, the archer Castor, and the hookman Bren. A 10th entry held the Eastern Watch soldier apart for Roman inquiry. The old fort register remained separate. We pushed off. The ferry's scorched deck smelled of pitch, wet grain, ox blood, and river mud. Nata's tiller had been washed but not clean. A ferryman named Pellis took it. Cotter sat beside him with his wounded arm tied, advising each angle. Prisca turned the west windlass. The remaining guide chain rose from the flood. Enemy arrows began before we cleared the landing. Tiro called releases from behind us. We used shield roofs rather than individual steps. Arrow step belonged to moments with visible shooters, sound footing, and room. The ferry deck rolled beneath crowded files. I kept the echo quiet. The black boar fighters on the east bank did not shoot only at us. They shot at the timber pin. Iron heads split wood around the brace. Every missed defense became damage to the crossing. Pellis angled upstream. The current pushed broadside. The raw rope steering splice creaked. Cotter told him to yield 3 links, then pull. Ferrymen aboard and West Windlass worked as one separated body. Tiro used hornbeats to keep their count together across water. A Roman signal sounded from the east repair shed. Not one Drusus had used, a medical call. One of the bound civilians near the brace slumped. A boar fighter put a blade to his neck and called in Latin that they would kill 1 hostage for every 10 capstan turns. Gaius shouted back that harming Roman dependents would bring crucifixion. The fighter cut the hostage's ear off. Threat answered threat, and the river kept moving. Rufus ordered no change. His face hardened around it. If we stop midstream, they kill all when the pin falls. The hostage remained alive, screaming and bleeding. Holding course was not clean. It was arithmetic performed on people who heard it. I watched the east roofs. 2 men moved behind the hostage line with jars, sabotage and theater again. While we looked at blades, they prepared fire at the repair shed. "Bowman, shod roof left," I called. Rufus passed it. Our 4 archers loosed. 1 jar carrier dropped his load and ran. The other threw. Clay broke against damp timber. Flame climbed but did not reach the guide brace. The ferry reached the middle. Then men beneath us struck the hull. Iron points punched through planks near the bow. River entered in thin black streams. Enemy swimmers had hidden behind upstream debris and let the ferry pass over them. One drove a broad auger through the deck between my feet. I jumped sideways without arrow step. My rear foot crossed. I fell against a shieldman and opened a gap in the roof. An arrow came through and struck the ferryman behind me in the shoulder. The wounded man remained standing only because another ferryman took the tiller rope from his hand. "Below," I shouted. Hanno had expected swimmers after Van. He and 2 auxiliaries carried weighted fishing nets. They cast over both sides, not to catch men cleanly, but to deny safe ascent. 1 swimmer surfaced inside a net and cut wildly. Another appeared behind the steering sweep with an auger. The netted swimmer hacked through 2 meshes, kicked away an auxiliary's reaching hook, and vanished upstream under the chain before the weights could close. I moved toward him. Hanno's boat hook intercepted the wrist. The swimmer twisted free and escaped downstream beneath the ferry. Ferrymen hammered pegs wrapped in wool into the hull holes. Livia had ordered repair plugs loaded after hearing Cotter describe the damage. Logistics answered a tactic before strength did. The east bank grew close. Hostages filled the landing. Boar shields stood behind them. Rufus could not ram the ferry without crushing the people we came to save. Pellis angled away at the last moment. The deck slid parallel to shore, 3 paces out. Enemy spears reached. Roman swords did not. The commander behind the hostages laughed. He wore a wolf-tooth collar and carried a heavy river axe. Wulfar, Van had called the ram captain before we left. He had placed bodies where our equipment became useless. One hostage moved. Prisca's older son, Faustus, threw himself backward into Wulfar's knees. The captive beside him caught the axe arm with bound hands. Others dropped flat or rolled toward the water. They had waited for the ferry to be close enough that their resistance had somewhere to go. Rufus did not miss the moment. Planks, shields over. Boarding bridges fell across the gap. The fight for the far bank began before either end touched stone. Faustus's revolt saved his throat and nearly cost his legs. Wulfar fell against him, then drove the axe haft down across both shins. The captive beside Faustus held the weapon arm with rope between bound wrists. A guard named Oscar drew a knife to cut them apart by cutting flesh. Our first shield man crossed the boarding plank. Oscar kicked it sideways. The man went into the river between ferry and bank. Hanno threw himself flat and caught the back of his harness before the current pulled him under the hull. The second plank held. Rufus sent shields over in pairs, low enough not to stab hostages. Gaius followed with his foot cavalry and drove toward the repair shed. He wanted solid ground for formation. Rufus wanted the civilians cleared first, their forces divided by task without losing sight of one another. I crossed behind 2 auxiliaries. An arrow struck the plank ahead. Arrow step suggested a short shift after the visible release. The plank was 1 shield wide. There was nowhere lateral to land except water. I knelt behind wood and waited for our archers to answer. By the time I reached shore, Oscar had Faustus by the hair. The knife sat under his jaw. The captive who had grabbed Wulfar's arm lay stunned. Wulfar faced Rufus. Boar shields pushed around both sides of the hostages, trying to separate our small bridgehead from the ferry. "Drop blades," Oscar shouted, "or this one dies." Faustus answered for us. He stamped backward at Oscar's foot and threw his head against the man's mouth. The knife cut skin, not throat. I closed while Oscar tried to recover the hold. He saw me and changed from hostage grip to wrestling. One arm went around my neck. The knife stayed beside my ribs. Turning into the neck arm would have opened the blade. I trapped the knife wrist first, but the splinted hand failed to close. Oscar drove me backward until my heel entered water. Faustus, still bound, hooked his rope around Oscar's knife elbow. Hanno rose from the rescued shieldman and struck Oscar's wrist with the boat hook shaft. I used that changed position. Contact at the neck, leverage under the elbow, left foot back on stone, hips beside rather than beneath him. I turned toward the weak thumb. Oscar's hold opened. My neck came free. I fell to one knee. He kicked me in the ribs and raised the blade. Faustus bit his calf. The auxiliary I had knocked open to an arrow on the ferry arrived with the shaft still lodged in his shoulder guard. He shielded the knife. I seized Oscar's belt with my left hand and pulled him into the shield boss. Hanno struck the weapon away. Faustus rolled across the man's ankles. We pinned him alive under 2 shields. Experience gained 350, level 8. Experience 350 of 2,100. Without Faustus, Hanno, and the wounded ferryman, Oscar would have opened me from ribs to hip. We cut the hostage ropes. 11 ferrymen and family members were alive, including the man missing an ear. Prisca had counted correctly from the opposite bank. 2 others lay dead inside the repair shed, killed when they refused to reveal the West signal changes. Their names were Leto and Aulus, brothers who greased the chain at dawn. The crossing had held them before it held Rome. Mara's work on the west bank reached us through Tiro's Horn. 3 short, 2 long, all evacuated civilians accounted for. She had moved Elia, Nata, Junior's sister, ferry families, and road travelers beyond arrow range. Livia's second copy had gone south under 6 riders by different paths. Evidence continuity no longer depended on the chest beneath the customs house. Wulfar withdrew into the brace yard with 12 boar fighters. The east guide ring stood in the center, iron mounted between 2 stone shoulders. Its timber pin had split lengthwise. One hard axe blow would drop the chain. He did not strike it. He tied a rope from the pin to the waist of the last hostage he still held, a boy of perhaps 14. If Romans rushed the brace, Wulfar could pull boy and pin together. The boy would go beneath the falling chain. Rufus formed shields at the yard gate. Gaius said, "Shoot Wulfar." 4 bowmen had angles. Wulfar kept the boy close and shifted behind the stone shoulder. Eagle sight might show the captain's level, injury, and skill. It would not trace the rope hidden behind stone or predict when his hand pulled. I opened it anyway for less than 1 heartbeat because Rufus requested a read. Wulfar, level 9, strength 15, endurance 16, agility 11. Mastered skills, river ram, axe seat. Injury, bruised right knee, fresh. Purple closed over his hands. Pain ran from my eyes into my teeth. I shut the gold and gave Rufus only what I had seen. Slow to shift, strong brace, right knee hurt, no view of the rope hand. Rufus passed the facts. Gaius told bowmen to wait. The hostage boy solved the hidden hand. He stared at Faustus, who had moved to our rear with cut ropes around his wrists. Faustus touched his own knee, then dropped. The boy understood. He collapsed without warning. Wulfar's rope arm jerked down. His injured knee bent to hold the weight. Our bowmen loosed at the exposed shoulder. One shaft struck his mail and turned him. The boy rolled behind the stone ring. Rufus attacked. The brace yard could hold 8 shields abreast. Wulfar had built a ram from 4. Boar fighters locked behind a timber beam and drove it into Rufus's short wall. The first collision moved us 2 paces. The second pressed men against the gate posts. The iron guide ring stood behind the enemy. We could not yield far without giving them room to cut it. We could not meet repeated force forever. No golden brace answered. Rufus had forbidden me a spear after seeing the cellar clumsiness. I carried a shield on the left and gladius on the right, despite the splint making the sword nearly useless. "Do not contest the beam," I told him. "Open 1 file before impact. Let it enter, close on sides. They drive through to the ferry. Not if the guide ring stops the beam." The iron ring was fixed waist-high behind them. If the ram entered at an angle, its end would strike stone or iron. Machinery could check force where my lost echo could not. Rufus saw the line. 3rd file yields on my count. Wulfar called the next drive. His fighters came. Tiro's horn carried from across the river. 1, 2, 3. Our 3rd file opened. Wulfar aimed for the gap and committed river ram. Rufus's outer shields turned inward. The beam entered between them. Its far end struck the iron ring. Wood stopped, men did not. Boar fighters crushed against their own beam. Roman shields closed on both sides. Wulfar climbed over it with his axe. His skill named axe seat showed itself. He planted 1 foot on the beam and used the broad blade to hold space, cutting down at helmets while his men recovered beneath him. The injured knee stayed high where it did not have to push from ground. He made a moving wall from 1 body and an axe. Gaius attacked his support. The tribune's short spear went under the beam and struck a boar fighter in the thigh. Hanno pulled another out by the ankle. Rufus kept the wall from chasing Wulfar's blade. I used shield hook on the axe shaft when it struck my scutum. Practiced guidance turned the rim, caught wood below iron, and drew it down. Strength 11 helped me hold 1 instant. Wulfar's strength 15 tore it free and pulled my shoulder toward the beam. He seized my harness with his other hand. I turned under the high grip. His axe haft blocked my hip halfway. My heel struck the timber beam, and Wulfar headbutted me before I could recover. He tried to throw me over the ring. Rufus hooked his vine staff behind Wulfar's bruised knee. Faustus, no soldier and under no order, rolled the hostage rope around the captain's ankle from outside the wall. Gaius struck Wulfar's axe wrist with his spear butt. 3 separate actions changed the hold. I released my shield rather than fight for it. The harness grip remained. Without the blocked shoulder, I stepped beside Wulfar, trapped his thumb with the edge of my splint, and turned under his elbow. The novice counter opened the grip. Pain shot through my wrist. I did not throw him. I made 1 pace of room. Rufus used it. His shield drove Wulfar's weight onto the injured knee. Hanno pulled the rope. Gaius's cavalrymen tore the axe away. The captain fell against the iron ring and kept punching until Faustus sat on the bad leg and 3 legionaries bound his arms. Experience gained 500, level 8, experience 850 of 2,100. Wulfar's 12 fighters split at the ring. 4 retreated through the houses, 3 died at the beam, and 5 yielded after Rufus's shields enclosed them against the brace. The boy at the pin lived. His rope had cut the skin around his waist. Rufus made a ferryman record his name and injury on a wax scrap. We had the east guide ring. The pin did not. It split with a sound like a branch under snow. The chain dropped 1 span. The ferry heeled. Men on deck fell toward the downstream rail. Tiro's horn gave a broken warning from across the water. Cotter shouted from the tiller, "Wedge! Iron wedge under the brace!" The wedge lay inside the burning repair shed. Rod, the reed firemaster, had waited there with 4 men while Wulfar held our eyes. He kicked open the rear doors, threw pitch across the only approach, and raised a hammer over the wedge. Rod struck once. The iron wedge moved a finger out of its socket. The guide chain dropped another handspan. On the ferry, Pellis and the crew threw weight upstream to keep the deck level. Across the river, Prisca reversed the capstan 1 click so the west chain would not tear its mounting free. Rod struck again. Rufus sent shields toward the shed. Pitch fire covered the threshold. A legionary tried wet hide over it. Reed archers shot him through the calf and pinned the hide to the ground. Smoke poured low from green wood stored inside. Gaius ordered men through the flame. "They arrive burning," I said. "If the wedge comes free, the ferry goes." Both were true. The order still wasted the first body unless we changed the floor. The East Village well stood uphill. Its trough fed a drainage channel past the repair shed. Ferrymen used a wooden gate to wash grease and filings from the yard. The gate remained closed. Faustus washed channel. He ran before Rufus repeated it. 2 freed hostages went with him. An arrow followed. Faustus used a house corner instead of racing straight. Ordinary local knowledge chose a safer path. Rod struck a 3rd time. The wedge showed half its length. I searched for the drainage mouth through smoke. Eagle sight would find only visible men, not the buried channel. A ferryman pointed with his chin. We pulled the pinned wet hide aside and exposed a stone gutter beneath the pitch. The wash gate opened uphill. Water came dirty with stable straw. It spread through the gutter, under the burning pitch, and lifted flame from the threshold in patches, not extinguished, broken into lanes. Rufus sent shields through the wet lanes. Hanno led. I followed because Hrod's men wore Roman belts and might use Drusus's command tricks. My hip dragged. Purple shadow made the right edge of the door appear twice. I chose the solid one by watching where smoke broke. Inside, Hrod's men had overturned workbenches into a low barricade. They threw short spears, then used hammers and chisels at close range. Iron filings, grease, water, and charcoal covered the floor. Shield hook could catch the small round shields of 2 fighters, but my left arm still tingled from Castor's arrow. Hanno took 1 hammer on his shield. Rufus's first file drove in behind him. Hrod struck the wedge again from the far side of the ring socket. I saw his plan. Removing the wedge was not his only task. A clay jar sat beneath the guide chain, where it passed through the wall. He had packed it with pitch and lamp oil. Once iron fell and scraped stone, sparks could light the spilled mixture, or his torch could. He meant to burn the chain grease and the ferry's raw steering splice together. Jar under the ring. A reed fighter kicked it over. Oil ran across the floor toward the threshold fire. I used arrow step. The The torchbearer was visible, his arm committed. There was one patch of wet flagstone to my left, short and clear. Outside foot tested, shift after release, shoulders square, the injured hip cramped on landing. I stayed upright long enough to put the scutum over the spreading oil. The torch hit shield wood and flared against its face instead of liquid. A hidden man behind the bench struck me with a hammer. The blow landed across my bruised ribs. Arrow Step had answered what I saw and placed me beside what I did not. Air vanished. I went down on the burning shield, wool cover smoking. Hrod raised his hammer for the wedge again. Cotter came through the threshold with one arm useless. He threw the chain chisel. It struck Hrod's hand and made him miss. Hanno drove over the bench. A ferryman named Pellis tackled the torchbearer rather than fight the hammerman. The hidden attacker seized the back of my harness. I tried to turn from one knee. Grease took my sandal, and I slipped. The man dragged me toward the oil. Rufus cut the harness strap with his gladius, struck the attacker's elbow, and pulled me clear. I rolled away on hands and knees while Hanno pinned the man against the bench. Hrod abandoned the wedge and came for me with a long iron lever. He wanted the gold-eyed target more than the mechanism for one breath. That error gave Cotter time to kick the wedge back into its socket with both feet. The guide chain rose half a hand. The ferry steadied. Hrod swung. I put the scorched scutum between us. The lever split what Castor's arrow had weakened. Wood broke down the center. Hrod drew back for another blow. Shield hook still knew a broken rim. I caught the lever near his hands, stepped toward him, and turned. Practiced economy mattered because my left arm had little strength left. The lever struck the iron ring and rang through the shed. Hrod released it and grappled me. One arm went under mine. The other caught my belt. I tried to step beside him, but he drove forward before my foot settled. Cotter struck the back of Hrod's knee with the chain chisel handle. Pellis, free of the torchbearer, caught his belt from the other side. Multiple allies disrupted the hold. This time they disrupted his, not mine. I trapped Hrod's thumb, stepped into the space Cotter created, and turned under the arm. The counter opened his grip. Hanno's shield took his chest. Rufus swept the lever away. Hrod fell into the empty water trough and continued kicking until Faustus slammed the wash gate. A surge of dirty water filled the trough around him and stole his footing. He yielded before it covered his mouth. Experience gained 450, level 8. Experience 1,300 of 2,100. We bound Hrod and 3 of his men outside the shed. The 4th had died behind the workbench. The fire was smothered with wash water and wet hides. Cotter hammered the wedge fully home, while the right arm hung useless. Pellis added a second timber brace cut from Wulfar's ram. Enemy equipment became repair. The ferry reached the east landing. We had restored both ends of the chain, freed the hostages, defeated the fire attack, and put Roman shields around the repair yard. The crossing was not held yet. Black boar horns sounded from the ridge, white mane archers moved into the upper houses, and deserters in Roman armor formed behind them. Tiro's signal came across the water. Enemy on West Road 2. The final assault would strike both banks at once. Vel led the final assault from the east ridge. He wore Roman scale armor over a black tunic and carried a boar-painted scutum. Deserters formed around him in a Roman file. White mane archers occupied the roofs on his right. Black boar shields filled the village lane. Reed swimmers moved below the bank with axes for the ferry hull. On the west road, another force advanced toward Tiro, Livia, the evidence cellar, prisoners, civilians, and the only working capstan. Armin's confederation did not need one tactic to succeed. It needed any two to make the third impossible. Rufus had 28 fit fighters on the east bank, including Gaius's men. He could send the ferry west with half of them and leave the repair brace exposed, or hold east while the west capstan fell. The raw steering splice would not survive repeated crossings under attack. Gaius ordered the ferry loaded for west. Rufus looked at me once, not because I outranked anyone, because he had already accepted one decision about machinery and wanted the next stated before he spent men. I watched the guide chain. the repaired brace, the current, and Tiro's signals. The west force carried ladders but no jars. The east force carried shields and swimmers. Vel wanted us to run west. If we did, he would take the ring and let the river destroy the ferry behind us. Hold east, I said. Send the ferry empty except bowmen and ferrymen. It becomes a moving shield and reinforcement bridge. West keeps its wall because Livia still has reserve guards and wounded men. Tiro can command signals, not soldiers. Rufus sends orders by horn. Gaius said, "You would leave records to clerks and cripples. I would leave the West Bank to the people already holding it, with the ferry between us instead of tied here. If we load soldiers, we give Vel the East Ring. If we leave the deck empty, Prisca can move it wherever the pressure rises." Rufus asked Cotta. "Chain carries the deck," he said. "One more crossing if nobody crowds it." Rufus decided. Empty ferry west, 4 bowmen aboard. Tiro receives my signals. Livia controls evacuation and evidence. Flaccus commands no line, but he tells the ranking guard what Tiro sees. Gaius and I hold east. Varro stays under my eye. He made every part of the disposition an order in his own voice, then sent the ferry away. The ferry pushed away as Vel descended. His deserters gave Roman advance calls. Tiro answered from the west roof with his new pattern, 1 long, 3 short. Our line ignored every familiar order from the enemy. Vel changed to boar horns. Black shields charged the repair yard. Rufus formed short wall around the guide ring. Gaius held the lane. I stood in the second file with half a broken scutum and a gladius my splint could barely guide. Hanno guarded the riverside. Faustus and the freed ferrymen carried water, stones, rope, and wounded men rather than joining a formation they did not know. The collision drove us into the iron brace. Vel used Roman rotation. Fresh fighters replaced the front every 10 breaths. White mane arrows fell whenever our shields rose against spears. Reed swimmers struck the bank below, forcing Hanno to turn men toward axes beneath the ring. Eagle sight could measure Vel if I kept him visible. I opened it for 1 blink at Rufus's request. VEL, level 11, strength 17, endurance 16, agility 14, vitality 15, intelligence 14, mastered skills, borrowed wall, boar turn, prison grip, injury, cut left calf, fresh. The purple darkness became nearly complete. Blood warmed the corner of my left eye. I closed sight and gave Rufus the facts while they remained facts. No loyalty, no next action, no hidden swimmers, no certainty that prison grip resembled lock break. Vel came through the line behind a captured Roman shield. Borrowed wall let his deserters use our spacing against us. He struck where Rufus's short wall expected a friendly rotation, then turned the shield edge into the opening. Gaius met him with a spear. Vel used boar turn, rolled the thrust off the scutum, and drove his shoulder into the tribune. Gaius went down beneath 2 bodies. His cavalrymen broke formation to reach him. Rufus shouted them back into the wall. 1 obeyed, 3 did not. Command friction opened the lane. I moved into it with ordinary feet, a broken shield, and a short sword. A long shaft still felt wrong in my hands. Vel hit the broken scutum. Its split closed around his rim for 1 instant. Shield hook guided my left arm. Catch, turn, feet first. Practiced technique moved his shield enough for Hanno to strike the cut calf with a boat hook shaft. Vel did not fall. He released the scutum and seized me with both hands. Prison grip locked 1 arm behind my back and 1 around my throat. His strength 17 overwhelmed mine. The splinted hand was trapped. The left could not reach, and his hips stayed behind mine. He dragged me toward the river, using my body as cover from Roman spears. Rufus could not strike. Hanno could not hook without catching my throat. Vel called for his swimmers to bring rope. A second attacker pushed a knife against my ribs from below. Faustus threw the repaired washgate rope around Vel's injured calf. Cotta and Pellis pulled from the shed. The hold shifted. Vel kept my throat but lost his hip position. Hanno caught the knife wrist below us. Rufus drove his shield into Vel's shoulder. My left hand reached the thumb at my throat. I turned toward the opening, stepped beside his damaged leg, and lowered under the elbow. The restraint opened enough for air and one arm. I dropped instead of standing. Vel's weight followed. Faustus's rope tightened around his calf. He fell against the iron ring. Gaius rose with blood in his mouth and put the spear point beneath Vel's mail. Hanno pinned the knife. Rufus struck Vel's weapon hand with the vine staff. Ferryman pulled the calf rope from beyond his reach. Vel still fought, trying to turn the ring into leverage, until two legionaries bound the free arm to the brace. He remained alive and unable to continue. Experience gained 800. Level 9 reached. Experience 0 of 2700. 2 free stat points available. Oscar, Wulfar, Hrod, and Vel had brought the second threshold to 2,100 with no overflow. I chose 1 point of endurance and 1 of intelligence. Blood still reached my sandal from the hip. My right wrist remained splintered and swollen. The new upper arm knife graze bled. The hammer blow had deepened the rib bruising. My left eye showed purple darkness with fresh blood at its corner. The scalp cut stayed closed. The throat bruise had improved, and exhaustion remained beneath endurance 13. Vel's capture did not end either attack. The ferry reached west while we fought. Its 4 bowmen shot down into the ladder carriers. Tiro directed them from the roof, switching targets between road and river. Livia opened the custom cellar rear door and moved the evidence chest uphill behind a wall of wounded soldiers who could hold shields but not march. Flaccus passed Rufus's horn order to the ranking guard instead of claiming command. Mara took civilians farther south by counted households. Junia and Prisca kept the capstan turning. Natta, stitched and barely conscious, corrected their chain count from a litter. On the east bank, Wulfar's captured ram became our barricade. Cotta locked the iron wedge. Pellis led ferrymen with poles against swimmers. Gaius recovered his cavalrymen and sealed the village lane. Rufus kept short wall around the ring. Vel's deserters tried one more rotation. Tiro's invented signal exposed it. Their call received no Roman movement. Rufus struck the fixed file. White Mane archers withdrew when the ferry bowmen gained their roof angle. Reed swimmers abandoned axes when nets filled the shallows. Boar fighters attempted to recover Vel, failed against the ring barricade, and retreated uphill carrying their wounded. Rufus forbade pursuit. The horns receded. No hidden reserve appeared. No new barge came around the bend. Scouts watched from the ridge but no longer advanced. The Iron Ferry traveled west, unloaded bowmen and wounded, then returned east under the repaired chain. Once, twice, on the third passage it carried the separated evidence copy south with 8 guards and 2 ferrymen who knew every landing. The main chest remained under Livia's seals. The prisoners remained named and guarded. Civilians crossed by household after soldiers tested each repair. Both banks stood in Roman hands. The ferry was held. We counted before anyone called it victory. All 11 East Bank hostages Prisca had named were recovered alive. The man whose ear Wulfar cut survived. Faustus's shins were bruised, not broken. The 14-year-old boy at the pin had rope burns around his waist. Ilia remained with Junia and her sister. Old Natta lived with a deep shoulder cut. Cotta's upper arm wound had missed the bone but ended his work for the day. Pellis had burns on both hands. 2 ferrymen, Leto and Aulus, were dead in the repair shed. 3 soldiers died on the ferry or landing. More were wounded. The count did not turn them into a clean price. Mara returned only after every displaced family had a name beside a shelter. Livia reconciled her evidence. Main chest present under 3 seals. First copy uphill and intact. Second copy delivered beyond the crossing under escort. Payment margin intact. Drusus's horn wax. Erdo's signal strip. And deserter names added under witnesses. Caldus remained missing. The unknown Roman authorizer remained unknown. Rufus closed the ferry tablet before transfer. Its 21 hostile captives were Drusus, Van, and Rusk from the chain, Erdo from the capstan, Maro from the capsized boat, the 2 surrendered boarders, Castor and Bren from the fire barge, Oscar, Wulfar, and the 5 boar fighters who yielded at the ring, Hrod and the 3 reed fighters taken at the shed, and Vel, the Eastern Watch soldier who had surrendered, stood apart as one Roman detainee. All 22 crossed under guard to the fort. None died, escaped, or changed category on the road. Secundus accepted 21 hostile captives and 1 new Roman detainee beside the old register. He confirmed its dozen unchanged, 9 hostiles, 2 Roman military detainees, including Afer, and critically wounded Vibius. Fort custody therefore held 30 hostile captives, 3 Roman detainees, and Vibius, 34 people. Odo and Beran remained separately under treatment and outside that custody count. The surgeon reached me after the last civilian ferry passage. He saw blood at my eye, the opened hip, cracked splint, upper arm cut, scorched tunic, and the way I protected my ribs. 5 days, he said. I remember. You spent more days than exist. He found the hip closure stretched and bleeding, but not fully torn apart. The wrist ligaments had worsened without breaking bone. The 2 bruised ribs were joined by deeper bruising from Hrod's hammer, still no obvious fracture. The arm graze needed 4 stitches. Eagle sight overuse had restarted minor bleeding at the left eye and enlarged the purple shadow. He forbade sight until the bleeding stopped, and for no fewer than 7 days after that. The closed scalp cut remained closed. The throat bruise continued to improve. Exhaustion required sleep rather than a stat point. Cassian arrived from the fort on a wagon, only after Secundus could spare an escort. Fever had fallen again, but his leg remained packed, and he was furious enough to seem healthy from a distance. Tiro gave him the battle in signal order before I could improve my part. Cassian listened to the dismissal without interrupting. "Show me the spear," he said. I took a practice shaft left-handed. The old check existed as learned fragments, but the golden path was gone. My rear foot wandered. The point drifted across Tiro's space. Cassian knocked it aside. "Temporary clumsiness," I said. "Real enough to kill him. No spear in a line until we rebuild the movement without the echo." I opened Tiro's slow single-hand grip once on flat ground. Cassian then pinned both arms and touched a wooden knife to my ribs before I set my feet. Nothing opened. "Drill the trick you actually own," he said, "after the surgeon stops trying to murder you." Rufus assembled soldiers, ferrymen, clerks, and witnesses beside the west capstan after the final count. Gaius stood with his bruised mouth. Livia held the field tablet. Secundus remained at the fort with Marcellus's survivors and the original prisoners. Rufus stated the conduct. He credited my 2 recommendations, then named my broken medical orders, opened wound, lost formation, and rash use of an undrilled counter. He credited Tiro's signals, the ferryman's machinery, Livia and Mara's protections, the freed family's resistance, and the soldiers who had carried both decisions. Then Rufus requested an acting optio for the damaged mixed detachment at the crossing. Gaius could have chosen a cavalryman. Instead, he looked at the ferryman, the sealed proof, and men who had already followed decisions carrying my name. He made the politically useful choice. Lucius Varro is appointed acting optio under Centurion Rufus for the defense and repair detail at the Iron Ferry, Gaius said. The appointment is provisional, revocable, and subject to medical restriction and command review. It grants no independent campaign authority. Rufus handed me no vine staff, and Optio's place was behind a line, keeping it closed, carrying the centurion's order, and replacing him only if required. Acting meant the work began before the title became secure. "You won a decision," Rufus said quietly. "You did not win freedom from correction." I noticed. Cassian raised 2 fingers from his wagon. This time the acknowledgement belonged to a soldier. I opened the system panel without sight. Lucius Varro, Level 9, Experience 0 of 2,700, Strength 11, Endurance 13, Agility 12, Vitality 12, Intelligence 14, Skill Echoes, Shield Hook Practiced, Arrow Step Novice, Lock Break Novice, Echo Slots 3 of 3, Work Resumed, Ferrymen replaced pins, soldiers raised wet screens against arrows, Livia sent the payment proof south, Tiro rewrote every crossing signal, Rufus posted double guards over the capstans and placed no deserter alone with a mechanism. I took my place under him and counted both banks until dusk. Only after the crossing was repaired enough to carry a loaded wagon did a single northern boat appear upstream under white wool. Rufus allowed it to drift within bow range. No living messenger stood aboard. A Boer standard had been fixed upright in the bow. Roman armor covered it, a dented helmet, cut mail, belt plates, greaves, and a centurion's stained transverse crest. Each piece was nailed through iron or leather into the black wood. Some bore unit marks from patrols still missing beyond the northern ridge. Tiro lowered the horn. Livia did not let anyone touch the boat until witnesses marked its position. Gaius read the challenge in silence. Cassian stared at the nailed armor and knew more names than he spoke. A strip of pale hide hung beneath the silver boar. On it, in Roman letters, someone had written one line: "Iron holds men, fear holds Rome." Armin had not taken the ferry. He had sent back what remained of Romans captured elsewhere, nailed to the standard of the army coming for it.